Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism by Gershom G. Scholem, Merkabah Mysticism and Jewish Gnosticism. In the often highly imaginative description of the angelic sphere, which one finds in the Hebrew Enoch book of the Merkabah period, Metatron's rank is always placed very high. Mithrun. Nevertheless, the classical writings of the Merkabah school contain no suggestion that he is to be regarded as being one with the glory that appears on the throne. Throughout this literature, Metatron, or whatever name is given to him, remains in the position of the highest of all created beings, while the occupant of the throne revealed in the Shi'ur Koma is, after all, the Creator himself. No attempt is made to bridge the gulf. What has been said of the relationship of the mystic in his ecstasy towards God is true also of the supreme exaltation of the Prince of Angels himself. The latter, incidentally, is also called Anaphiel, according to an independent tradition, which has found its reflection in the greater Hekaloth. And the characteristics given of this angel make it clear that Anaphiel is not simply one more name for Metatron, but is the name of another figure for which some mystics retained that supreme rank. Section 8. Several texts have preserved codifications of the throne mysticism abounding among the Merkabah travelers, and elaborate lists of the problems and questions relevant in this context. These do not all belong to one particular period. Subjects which appear to be of great importance in one text are not even mentioned in the other. One such codification of pure throne mysticism, for example, is to be found in the brief treatise on the Hekaloth, which probably dates back to the 8th century of the Common Era. Here, the imaginative description of objects which were originally really visualized, but are now treated at great length, purely for the purpose of edification, has already reached Baroque proportions. A more concise and restrained account of the principal subjects of Merkabah mysticism, apparently based on a Hekaloth track, is to be found in the Midrash to Solomon's Proverbs. Here too, Rabbi Ishmael appears as the representative of the esoteric tradition. In this case, he enumerates the questions which the doctors of the Torah will be asked by God on the Day of Judgment. The crowning part of this examination are the questions referring to esoteric doctrine. If there comes before him one who is learned in the Talmud, the Holy One, praise be to him, says to him, "My son, since you have studied the Talmud, why have you not also studied the Merkabah and perceived my splendor? For none of the pleasures I have in my creation is equal to that which is given to me in the hour when the scholars sit and study the Torah, and looking beyond it, see and behold and meditate these questions. How the throne of my glory stands, what the first of its feet serves as, what the second foot serves as, what the third and what the fourth serve as, how the hashmal, seen by Ezekiel in his vision, stands, how many expressions he takes on in an hour, and which side he serves, how the heavenly lightning stands, how many radiant faces are visible between his shoulders, and which side he serves, and even greater than all this, the fiery stream under the throne of my glory, which is round like a stone made of brick, how many bridges are spanned across it, how great is the distance between one bridge and the next, and if I cross it, over which bridge do I cross? which bridge do the Ophanim, a class of angels, cross? And which do the Galgalim, another class, cross? Even greater than all this, how I stand from the nails of my feet to the parting of my hair, how great is the measure of my palm, and what is the measure of my toes? Even greater than all this, how the throne of my glory does stand, and which side it does serve on every day of the week. And is this not my greatness? Is not this my glory and my beauty, that my children know my splendor through these measurements? And of this David had said, O Lord, how manifold are thy works? It is apparent from this passage that all these questions were systematically discussed, although some of them are not mentioned in the texts which have been preserved. Of the bridges in the Merkabah world, for instance, we find almost no mention in the Greater Hekaloth and the Book of Enoch. We have several vivid descriptions. Among the most important objects which Metatron describes to Rabbi Ishmael is the cosmic veil, our curtain before the throne, which conceals the glory of God from the host of angels. The idea of such a veil appears to be very old. References to it are to be found already in Agadic passages from the 2nd century. The existence of veils and the resplendent sphere of the ions is also mentioned in a Coptic writing belonging to the Gnostic school, the Pistis Sophia. Now, this cosmic curtain, as it is described in the Book of Enoch, contains the images of all things, which, since the day of creation, have their pre-existing reality, as it were, in the heavenly sphere. All generations and all their lives and actions are woven into this curtain. He who sees it penetrates at the same time into the secret of messianic redemption. For, like the course of history, the final struggle and the deeds of the Messiah are already pre-existently real and visible. As we have seen, this combination of knowledge relating to the Merkabah and the Hekaloth with a vision of the messianic end, the inclusion, that is to say, of apocalyptic and eschatologic knowledge is very old. It dominates the apocalypse of Abraham and the Book of Enoch, no less than the various Hekaloth tracts 4 or 8 centuries later. All of them contain varying descriptions of the end of the world and calculations of the date set for the redemption. Indeed, there is a passage in the Greater Hekaloth where the meaning of the Merkabah vision is summed up in the question, when will he see the heavenly majesty? When will he hear of the final time of redemption? When will he perceive what no eye has yet perceived? Incidentally, according to these mystics, that which now belongs to the domain of secret lore shall become universal knowledge in the Messianic age. The throne and the glory which rest on it shall be revealed anon to all inhabitants of the world. At the same time, the reasons now obscure of the commandments of the Torah will also be revealed and made plain. It is safe to say that what might be termed apocalyptic nostalgia was among the most powerful motive forces of the whole Merkabah mysticism. The attitude of these mystics towards the reality of history is even more pointedly negative than that of the contemporary Jewish theologians, the Agadists. The depressing conditions of the period, the beginning of the era of persecution by the Church since the 4th century, directed the religious interests of the mystics towards the higher world of the Merkabah. From the world of history, the mystic turns to the prehistoric period of creation, from whose vision he seeks consolation, or towards the post-history of redemption. Unfortunately, the sources at our disposal shed no light on the social environment of the founders and leaders of the movement. As I said at the beginning of this lecture, they have been only too successful in preserving their anonymity. And before we start part 9 of this, it's important to note that even when a text is solidly, literally good and true throughout, when we're talking about a religious text, it's a means to something greater. You get past the story, you get the rules and the skills. But then you get to the relationship of it all. Kind of going backwards from the child to the father to the mother stage, but yeah. But you don't give up any of those, whether you're going backwards or forwards, right? Well, I mean, you don't have to anyways. In contrast to the connection between throne mysticism and apocalyptic, which, as we have seen, is very close, that between eschatology and cosmogony, the end of things and the beginning of things is rather loose, at any rate in the writings which have come down to us. In this respect, Merkabah mysticism differs not only from non-Jewish forms of Gnosticism, but also from Kabbalism of the later period, where the connection between the two is exceedingly close. Moreover, the comparatively sparse account devoted to the subject under the heading of Reflections on the Maseh Bereshith is a cosmology rather than cosmogony. That is to say, the emphasis is laid, so far as we are in a position to judge, on the order of the cosmos rather than on the drama of its creation, which plays so large a part in the mythology of the Gnostics. One has only to read the Bara Itha on the work of creation, which includes some fragments belonging to this period, albeit in a comparatively recent edition, and whose connection with Merkabah mysticism is evident, to become aware of this difference between Merkabah speculation and Gnosticism proper. Its cause is obvious: the realm of divine fullness, the pleroma of the Gnostics, which unfolds dramatically. The succession of ions is directly related to the problem of creation and cosmogony. If you see what I did at the Georgia Guidestones, there's implication on the one side that kind of is a bit Gnostic, I would think, but it's directly related to the problem of creation and cosmogony. While for the Merkabah mystics, who substituted the throne world for the pleroma and the ions, this problem has no significance at all. The constituents of the throne world, the Hashmal, the Aphanim, the Hayath, the Seraphim, etc., can no longer be interpreted in terms of a cosmogonic drama. The only link between this realm and the problem of creation was, as we have seen, the idea of the cosmic curtain. Here we have one of the most important points of difference between Merkabah mysticism and Kabbalism. The latter is distinguished by renewed interest in purely cosmogonic speculation, whose spirit, often enough, is entirely Gnostic. In earlier literature, certainly during the phase represented by the Hekaloth, theoretical questions have no place. Its spirit is descriptive, not speculative, and this is particularly true of the best examples of this genre. Nevertheless, it is possible that there was a speculative phase in the very beginning, and that famous passage in the Mishnah which forbids the questions, what is above and what is below, what was before and what will be after, refers to theoretical speculation in the manner of the Gnostics, who strove after the knowledge of who we were and what we have become, where we were, are, where we were placed, whether we hasten from what we are redeemed. As a matter of fact, there exists indubitable proof that among certain groups of Jewish Gnostics who tried to stay within the religious community of Rabbinical Judaism, Gnostical speculation and related semi-mythological thought is kept alive. Traces of such ideas in Agadic literature are few, but they exist. Thus, for instance, there is the well-known saying of the Babylonian teacher Rav in the 3rd century of the Common Era: 10 are the qualities with which the world has been created: wisdom, insight, knowledge, force, appeal, power, justice, right, love, and compassion. are the following references to 7 hypostases of similar general ideas of the kind are often found in the names of Gnostical ions. 7 Medoth serve before the throne of glory: wisdom, right and justice, love and mercy, truth and peace. What the ions and the archons are to the Gnostics, the Medoth are to this form of speculation, i.e., the hypostasized attributes of God. Much more important are the relics of speculation concerning ions preserved in the oldest Kabbalistic text, the highly obscure and awkward book Bahir, which was edited in Provence during the 12th century. This brief document of Kabbalistic theology consists, at least in part, of compilations and editions of much older texts, which, together with other writings of the Merkabah school, had made their way to Europe from the East. It was my good fortune to make a discovery a few years ago, which renders it possible to identify one of these Eastern sources, namely the book Raza Rabbah, the Great Mystery, which some Eastern authors of the 10th century named among the most important of esoteric writings, and which was hitherto thought to have been lost. Fortunately, several lengthy quotations from it have been preserved in the writings of 13th century Jewish mystics in southern Germany, which leaves no doubt that the book Bahir was, to a large extent, directly based on it. It thus becomes understandable how Gnostical termini, technicae, symbols, and mythologums came to be used by the earliest Kabbalists who wrote their works in Provence during the 12th century of the Common Era. The point obviously has an important bearing on the question of the origins of the medieval Kabbalism in general. It can be taken as certain that, in addition to the Raza Rabbah, which appears to have been a cross between a mystical midrash and a Hekaloth text with a strong magical element thrown in, other similar fragments of ancient writings with Gnostic excerpts written in Hebrew made their way from the east to Provence. It was thus that reminders of Gnostic ideas transmitted in this fashion entered the mainstream of mystical thought via the book Bahir to become one of the chief influences which shaped the theosophy of the 13th century Kabbalists. And the existence of speculative Gnostic tendencies in the immediate neighborhood of Merkabah mysticism has its parallel in the writings grouped together under the name of Maseh Bereshith. This included a document, the Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Creation, which represents a theoretical approach to the problems of cosmogony and cosmology. The text probably includes interpolations made at a later period, but its connection with the Merkabah literature is fairly evident, at least as regards terminology and style. Written probably between the 3rd and 6th century of the Common Era, it is distinguished by its brevity. Even the most comprehensive of the various editions does not exceed 1,600 words. Historically, it represents the earliest extant speculative text written in the Hebrew language. Mystical meditation appears to have been among the sources from which the author drew inspiration, so far as the vagueness and obscurity of the text permits any judgment on this point. Now, that would indicate that historically Hebrew did not exist too long before that, because speculative texts pretty much appear immediately in most languages. But that's actually the 3rd century of the Common Era. Could be when you say that Hebrew actually makes an appearance as something distinct from Aramea. But the source appears to have sources from which the author drew inspiration, so far as the vagueness and obscurity of the text permits any judgment on this point. The style is at once pompous and laconic, ambiguous and oracular. No wonder, therefore, that the book was quoted in evidence alike by medieval philosophers and Kabbalists. Its chief subject matters are the elements of the world, which are sought in the 10 elementary and primordial numbers, Sephiroth, as the book calls them, and the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, which, if you look at the order of 9 angles things, as much as they try to separate from the that sort of thing, first the 21, and then you end up with somebody's 22. That's what that's all about. But anyways, these together represents the mysterious forces whose convergence has produced the various combinations observable throughout the whole of creation. They are 32 secret paths of wisdom, through which God has created all that exists. These Sephiroth are not just 10 stages, are representative of 10 stages in their unfolding. The matter is not as simple as that, but their end is in their beginning, and their beginning in their end. As the flame is bound to the coal, close your mouth lest it speak, and your heart lest it think. After the author has analyzed the function of the Sephiroth in his cosmogony, or rather hinted at the solution in some more or less oracular statements, he goes on to explain the function of the letters in creation. God drew them, hewed them, and combined them, weighed them, interchanged them, and through them produced the whole creation, everything that is destined to be created. He then proceeds to discuss, or rather to unveil, the secret meaning of each letter in the 3 realms of creation known to him: man, the world of the stars and planets, and the rhythmic flow of time through the course of the year, the combination of the late Hellenistic and perhaps even late Neoplatonic numerological mysticism with exquisitely Jewish ways of thought concerning the mystery of letters and language is fairly evident throughout. Nor is the element of Merkabah mysticism lacking. The author appears to have searched the Merkabah for a cosmological idea, and not without success, for it seems that the Hayoth in the Merkabah described by Ezekiel, i.e. the living beings which carry the Merkabah, are for him connected with Sephiroth as living numerical beings. For indeed these are peculiar numbers, of which it is said that their appearance is like a flash of lightning, and their goal is without end. His word is in them when they come forth from him, and when they return at his bidding, do they speed swiftly as a whirlwind, and before his throne they prostrate themselves. Various peculiarities of the terminology employed in the book, including some curious neologisms which find no natural explanation in Hebrew phraseology, suggest a paraphrase of Greek names, or likely a transliteration, but most of the details still await a full clarification. The precise meaning of the phrase Sephiroth, Belema, which the author constantly uses, and which may be the key to understanding what he actually had in mind when speaking of the Sephiroth, is a matter of speculation. The second word, Belema, which may be taken to denote or to qualify the specific nature of these numbers, has been explained or translated in accordance with the theories of several writers or translators. Infinite Sephiroth, or closed, abstract, ineffable, absolute Sephiroth, or even Sephiroth out of nothing. If the author of the book wanted to be obscure, he certainly succeeded beyond his wishes. Even the substance of its cosmogony, as set forth in the chapter dealing with Sephiroth, is still a subject of discussion. On the question whether the author believes in the emanation of his Sephiroth out of each other and of God, it is possible to hear directly conflicting views. According to some writers, he identifies the Sephiroth directly with the elements of creation, the spirit of God, ether, water, fire, and the 6 dimensions of space. Others, with whom I am inclined to agree, see in his description a tendency towards parallelism or correlation between the Sephiroth and the elements, and in effect the Sephiroth, which, like the host of angels in the Merkabah literature, are visualized in an attitude of adoration before God's throne, represent an entirely new element which has formed the conception of the classical Merkabah visionaries. On the other hand, one cannot overlook the connection between the Book of Creation and the theory of magic and theurgy, which, as we have seen, plays its part in Merkabah mysticism. The ecstatic ascent to the throne is not the only element of that mysticism. It also embraces various other techniques which are much more closely connected with magical practices. One of these, for example, is the putting on or clothing of the name, a highly ceremonious rite in which the magician impregnates himself, as it were, with the great name of God, i.e., performs the symbolic act by clothing himself in a garment into whose texture the name has been woven. The adjuration of the prince or archon of the Torah, Sar Torah, belongs to the same category. The revelation sought through the performance of such rites is identical with that of the Merkabah vision. The prince of the Torah reveals the same mysteries as the voice which speaks from the throne of fire, the secret of heaven and earth, the dimensions of the demiurge, and the secret names of the knowledge of which gives power over all things. It is true that, in addition to these magical practices, also hold out a promise of other things. For example, a more comprehensive knowledge of the Torah, chiefly reflected in the fact that the adept can no longer forget anything he has learned. And similar accomplishments, matters which, to the Hekloth mystics, were important but not vital, much as they tried to remain in conformity with rabbinical Judaism, a tendency which finds its expression in the emphasis laid in the greater Hekloth on the link with the halakhic tradition. These theurgical doctrines form a kind of meeting place for magic and ecstaticism. The theurgical element is brought to the fore in various writings which display manifold points of contact with the Hekloth tracts, as, to take some instances, Harba de Moshe, the Sword of Moses, Havdalah of Rabbi Akiba, and the recipes that are preserved in the book Shemusha Tehillim, the title of which means the magical uses of the Psalms. The latter have had a long, if not quite distinguished career in Jewish life and folklore. 11. If Merkabah mysticism thus degenerates in some instances into magic pure and simple, it becomes subject to a moral reinterpretation in others. Originally, the ascent of the soul was by no means conceived as an act of penitence, but in latter days the ancient Talmudic saying, "Great is repentance, for it leads to the throne of glory," came to be regarded, for example, by the Babylonian Gaon Jehudeh of the 8th century, as a reference to it. In this conception, the act of penitence becomes one with the ecstatic progress through the 7 heavens, already in one of the Hekloth tracts. The first 5 of the 7 places through which the soul must pass are placed parallel to certain degrees or stages of moral perfection. Thus Rabbi Akiba says to Rabbi Ishmael, "When I ascended to the first palace, I was devout, chassid. In the second palace, I was pure, tahor. In the third, sincere, yashar. In the fourth, I was holy with God, tamim. In the fifth, I displayed holiness before God. In the sixth, I spoke to the Kedusha, the Trisha Gyan, before him, who spoke and created, in order that the guardian angels might not harm me. In the 7th palace, I held myself erect with all my might, trembling in all my limbs, and spoke the following prayer: Praise be to thee, who art exalted. Praise be to the sublime in the chambers of grandeur. This tendency to set the stage is of ascent in parallel with the degrees of perfection obviously raises the question whether we are not faced here with a mystical reinterpretation of the Merkabah itself. Was there not a temptation to regard man himself as the representative of divinity, his soul as the throne of glory, etc.? A step in this direction had been taken by Macarius the Egyptian, one of the earliest representatives of the 4th century Christian monastic mysticism. The opening of his first homily reads like a program of his mystical faith. It offers a new explanation of the obscure vision of Ezekiel, i.e., of the Merkabah. According to him, the prophet beholds the secret of the soul, which is on the point of admitting its master and becoming a throne of his glory. We find an analogous reinterpretation of the Merkabah among the Jewish mystics in the thrice-repeated saying of the early 3rd century Palestinian Talmudist Simon ben Lakish. the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are the Merkabah. The author tries to justify this bold assertion by an ingenious exegetical reasoning based on certain scriptural phrases, but it is plain that the exegesis provided only the occasion for making it, not the motive. The latter is genuinely and unmistakably mystical. It must be emphasized that these tendencies are alien to the spirit of Hakeloth literature. We find in it none of that symbolic interpretation of the Merkabah, which was later revived and perfected by the Kabbalists. Its subject is never man, be he even a saint. The form of mysticism which it represents takes no particular interest in man as such. Its gaze is fixed on God and his aura, the radiant sphere of the Merkabah, to the exclusion of everything else. For the same reason, it made no contribution to the development of a new moral ideal of the truly pious Jew. All its originality is on the ecstatical side, while the moral aspect is starved, so to speak, of life. The moral doctrines found in Hakeloth literature are pale and bloodless. The ideal to which the Hakeloth mystic is devoted is that of the visionary who holds the keys to the secrets of the divine realm, and who reveals these visions in Israel. Vision and knowledge, in a word, gnosis, of this kind represents for him the essence of the Torah and of all possible human and cosmic wisdom. Now I can get into some of the notes on lecture 1 here. Where were we? Were we on 8? Markut, Halhut, described sometimes Perez of Barcelona, Matua, 1558, folio 82b, Da, Ki, Hain, Suf, Asher, Zuckernu, Ainu, Ramuz, La, Vatura, Wala, Ben, Biaim, Wala, Bucket, Tubim, Wala, Budri, Razul, Ak, Kablu, Bubli, Habuda, Qutset, Ramaz. In the fixed terminology of the author, mystics are referred to as Bali, Habuda, the people who are masters of worship. 9, the terms... we don't have time to share that.